Isaiah Berlin is an author that I think a lot about lately. And the reason is that I am fascinated by the new tools that AI provides for us. So the ability of mostly language generating models like ChatGPT and many others to produce text of growing quality at an incredible pace. How do I make this connection? Isaiah Berlin was a philosopher that built his philosophy on decades of very meticulous study of many different fields. He wasn't just focusing on one particular question and trying to pry it open. He was living his life fully. He was also enjoying everything else in life, music, travel, was a very sociable person, and he managed to connect these things to create a philosophy that I think is fundamentally very healthy and has played a large role in my own mental development and psychological development. My fear is that when this skill becomes very cheap, so when everybody can try to appear as knowledgeable, sophisticated, and articulate as Isaiah Berlin by just using artificial intelligence, this skill will disappear. And I think this will make for a very poor world. Without people like Isaiah Berlin, a lighthouse that shows us the way towards understanding the deepest questions in our humanity, the fate of our existence, I think, is very bleak. We must make sure that this doesn't disappear. So what I'm going to speak about today is, as I always do, give you a review of Isaiah Berlin. Then, as always, I'm going to say a few words about how reading him can help you improve your writing. And then I want to reflect a little bit about why scholarship of this kind is still very important and very valuable, and what are the steps that we can take as a society to make sure that it doesn't disappear. My name is Shai Lotan. I'm Associate Professor of International Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English. I first came across Isaiah Berlin almost by chance. I was in the army, and I went to the library next to my home that had a very small section for non-fiction books. I picked up a book that was called The Roots of Romanticism, and it was in Hebrew, a translation. And this was an incredible eye-opener for me. The basic idea of the book is that when Kant celebrated the Enlightenment and the idea that you can go against the past traditions and have a worldview that is based on reason, he basically gave rise to the Romantic movement that used a lot of his own ideas in a different way. So we think about men as the center of everything, but then instead of using it as an Enlightenment view that says, okay, so you will employ his reason to make the world more efficient, we would actually dive very, very deep into the motivations and the emotions that motivate a man. And then we have Romanticism in philosophy and in literature and in music and in paintings and in architecture. And I immediately resolved to start to read Goethe, as the movement of Sturm und Drang was a very important part of the movement that he was writing in. Was a very important part of the development of Romantic philosophy, Romantic literature, and later also philosophy. And then I read Thomas Mann, who became my favorite author of all times, and I read most of his important works with great dedication. And I think I owe that greatly to Isaiah Berlin to get me interested in that. I also mentioned in one of the other lectures that when I read Goethe, I read the Apprenticeship of Wilhelm Meister, which also introduced me to Shakespeare, and then I started to read Shakespeare, and then I completely changed my reading from mostly in Hebrew to mostly in English, and this has been the same until today. So, I mean, since I moved for several other languages as well, now I read in Danish and other languages as well, but this was really the key that got me excited, first about romantic philosophy and literature, and afterwards about English literature. So I owe a lot to Berlin, and I would say it's not just because of the thesis of a book, which was a short book, and I think that it has an interesting point, but the way he writes. So he writes in a way that shows incredible erudition, so knowledge that is unparalleled. What he would sometimes do is he would, for example, start a sentence and he would say, and this is the same in Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Gogol, and different from Chekhov and Turgenev and so on. So he would just kind of do something that may look to you as a lot of name dropping, but as you understand more and as you start to read these authors, you realize that there's actually a lot of wisdom in the way he does it. He positions these authors in a way that clarifies to the reader exactly the most important points of the writing. And he does it mostly in literature, but also on all the other fields of the humanities. And that's something that I think is very useful. And then it occurred to me that this is somebody that is a knowledge machine, so knows almost everything. Born in Russia, but spent most of his life in Oxford, in the UK. So I might as well try to read him in English. And that was a very smart decision. And then I started to read everything that I could find of Isaiah Berlin. So one of the books that immediately comes to mind and often is mentioned as one of the best books of the century is a book called Russian Thinkers. It's not a coincidence, because he's a Russian, he knows the Russian culture very, very well. He translated the giants of Russian literature to English, so he has a lot of things to say there, and it's a book that doesn't have just one thesis. It's actually almost a collection of essays that together are really monumental in the way they understand the Russian contribution to literature. So there are essays, for example, that explain that after the French Revolution, the Russian intelligentsia was instructed to send the kids that they used to send to the best schools in France to somewhere else, because it was considered too dangerous to send them over to France with all these revolutionary ideas. And many of them were sent to the German universities. But, as Isaiah Berlin says in this chapter, Frenchmen make revolutions, Germans plan them and dream them, and then a lot of these people that went to Germany were influenced by the most important scholar of the time, which is, of course, Hegel, and this influence we find all the way to Marx and later the theoreticians of communism. So this is basically the idea of dialectic that Hegel describes as the dialectic of ideas. So we have an idea, it's a thesis, there is some kind of a synthesis with an antithesis that arises and a synthesis between them. That's very different from what Hegel actually said, but that's a very, very simplified way to say it. So that's one form of dialectic. But then there's also an idea of materialistic dialectic, where the history is determined by the division of the assets that basically make the capital, and all the upper structure of ideas is built based on that. So all of this, he kind of notes the connections from the German universities of the beginning of the 19th century to the revolution that arises in Russia in the beginning of the 20th century. So that's one example. Another example, which I like even more, and actually I'm not sure, I read so many books of his, I'm not sure if it's exactly these Russian thinkers or another story about Russians, but he gives this example of a very, very powerful thesis. He says Russians have not given anything new to the world, but what they managed to do is to take ideas that were designed in other places and then concentrate them and reflect them back with an incredible intensity. So you take somebody like Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, the usual suspects, he would try to convince the reader that what they're doing is not absolutely original, but it just manages to take ideas that already were implanted elsewhere, mostly in Germany, and then improve them, intensify them, reflect them back, and then in the next wave, the cultures in other countries are basically relying on these Russian developments because they are so much more intense than the original. So that's another very useful thesis. Another book that I think is worth reading is Historical Inevitability, which is some kind of a discussion of determinism in history. I enjoy the book. I don't think it's one of his best, and I think that the more authoritative books on the subject, like Edward Carr, What is History, are killing it. So I mean, I criticize a lot, but it's a very nice read that is more kind of one book on a topic, whereas a lot of the other books that I read have short essays. One of the most famous short essays that I recommend for everybody to read, because it's a lot of fun, is The Hedgehog and the Fox. So that's an essay when he basically explains that there are authors that are focused on one very particular argument and authors that are focused on a very, very large universe of different ideas. And the interesting thing, and this goes again to his large, I think one of his best qualities as a writer, the way he argues for it and the way he chooses the authors is very, very useful, because obviously every author that made a contribution is a little bit of both, right? I mean, they both have this ability to concentrate on a certain topic, on a certain theme, on a certain plot, on a certain set of metaphors, set of values, and look beyond it. Otherwise, they will not be so great. But to try to divide them in this way and to explain and give examples, that's a very useful intellectual exercise. And that's also entered popular culture. So you can easily say about somebody, he's a fox, because he's interested in a lot of different things, and he's a hedgehog. So he's just focused on one very particular issue and works very hard to make it the best. I have to say that one of Yeshaya Belin's most intuitive contributions for a lawyer was never of very strong interest for me. I read the essay about Two Conceptions of Liberty and several versions of this, and I read papers about it. So basically the idea that you have a liberty that is a negative liberty, so nobody will impose on me to do things I don't want or take things away from me, and a positive liberty, so basically the ability to govern myself, maybe to take part in government and so on. So that's the basic discussion, and I think that's a very valuable case. It's just that for me this was more connected to my work as a lawyer, and because I never wrote something particularly exactly on it, it was not very interesting. Whereas reading about Russian thinkers completely out of everything that I studied, everything that I studied on this topic I did by myself, I spent a lot of time doing that. I was never guided to do it. Was something that was very exciting for me. So all in all, if you read Yeshaya Belin, just like I tell many times in this series of lectures about authors, you have a lot to read, which is a blessing. You can immerse yourself in his style, read a lot of his essays, and get to the point where you start to recognize these authors more and more. And I would tell you that that's one of the most satisfying things about reading Yeshaya Belin over many years, is that you kind of see, I read it in my 20s and a lot of names were just blanks for me. They didn't say anything. Then I read it in my 30s or my 40s, and suddenly I recognize, I read 2 books of this guy, 1 book of this guy I read about. So it kind of fills in the blanks, and that's something that I think is very, very enjoyable. I always like authors who do that. I don't think it's name dropping. It's a way for you to educate your readers. For example, Nissim Nicholas Taleb is an author that I really, really like, especially his earlier books, and I really appreciate the fact that I could see, after 10 years and hundreds of books that I read in the meantime, I realize that I know more, I recognize more, and I am grateful for this ability to slowly connect the different pieces of knowledge that I have and build a larger puzzle. That's something that Yashar Berlin would give you. Now let's move on to the conclusion of how Yashar Berlin can make you a better writer, and how is this connected to the age of AI. Now the main thing that Yashar Berlin does is it helps you know how to play with ideas on a large scale. So being able to read Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, Devils, and so on, and then just plant Dostoevsky in the right sentence in the right way. Just to name Dostoevsky as a symbol of something. He knows how to do this very, very well. Now, I think this is a skill that you need to have to become a better writer. It doesn't have to be Dostoevsky, it can be a particular book, it can be a particular idea, it can be a particular principle. But if you know you have a large vocabulary, you know how to use the language, to have a proper style and grammar, the next stage is to know how to weave ideas together. And Yashar Berlin can train you how to do that. You have to understand that until very few years ago, the ability to do that well was considered by many people, and I think is a good example of that, as something divine. I recall I once told to one of my friends on the phone that if I could give a contribution that Berlin did, I would happily give my 2 legs. I said that, and I didn't mean anything else. I just meant it very, very literally. I just thought that I would rather be a handicap on a wheelchair, but to have these great ideas in the world of the spirit. And again, I'm not inventing a cure for cancer here. I'm just trying to discuss the word of the spirit in a way that is unique, beautiful, original, intelligent, articulate. That was my life's goal. And then came Google. So suddenly, instead of me remembering, which I still do, the shelf in the library in Ramat HaSharon in Israel, where this book stood, and I could, in theory, I could take a plane, I can go over, I can pick up the book. I don't know if it's still there. It's been many years, but I don't think this has changed much. I can pick up the book, open the page, and I had this ability, after reading so many books, to really find anything very, very quickly. So I could find almost everything much, much faster than anybody else, but I still need to go to the library. And then we have Google that basically allows the search to be very, very fast and simple. So suddenly you don't need so much of this memory. So I said, okay, fine. So we focus on other things when we deal with cognitive intelligence. It's not just, locating numbers. This became useless. The name of a book or not, Google will find it. So we focus on understanding deeper ideas. Then came another revolution, Wikipedia. Wikipedia changed the rules of the game because it added so much text and analysis that a lot of things are there. So you can find easily in Wikipedia, even in the middle of a conference, which I think a lot of people are doing nowadays, which is something comes up, Google it, and then it moves them to Wikipedia, and you find a lot of arguments, not just dates and numbers, but ideas, and they are very well organized and very easy to use. So then I resolved to focus on what I consider to be the most important assets that intellectuals have, which is clear and beautiful writing. So the model of a scholar, it doesn't matter if it's Sigmund Freud or Immanuel Kant or even Plato. Well, this ability to produce 2 pages a day of ideas that build on each other, clean paragraphs based on knowledge, do it continuously again and again and again. And this was something that was considered impossible to replicate. This was the human element. Now, 2 years ago, ChatGPT came, and I saw that this is very quickly vanishing. Over time, I found mistakes, hallucinations that the computer makes, and the inaccuracies and style, but they were disappearing at an incredible pace. I thought to write a continuation for my book, which I over time put at the end of this YouTube channel, after every chapter, about the age of AI, what to do then. But I realized that if it takes me, even if it takes me a year from the time I finish the book until the time it actually goes to the stores, everything will be useless. It's just the changes are so rapid. So this ability to write in the Isaiah Berlin way, so the way that compares Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in light of their historical scenery and connects the philosophy to Kant. I mean, this is the kind of things that very, very few people manage to do. Now, ChatGPT is able to produce it very, very well. Sometimes I'm not, maybe an expert would have done better on a particular issue, but many times not. And we are at a point where I think all the points that are small failures and mistakes will quickly disappear. And I don't see any theoretical reason that even today, that's not science fiction, you will be able to produce a very detailed philosophical book within a matter of days just by guiding a little bit ChatGPT. And if you can do that, then there's no reason to imagine that you can't produce 100 books in a second just by using artificial intelligence. What does this mean? Well, this means that a lot of the skills that were once, the key to fame, to success, to financial success, academic success, are becoming quickly obsolete. And we need to find a new reason to use these skills. And this is again something that I think Isaiah Berlin can do very easily, because he was very much like the process. He loved life. He loved to study. And in this respect, he can be a guide to you, to my listeners, who would read him, get into the mode. Now, why do we need to do that? Here we get into a point where I don't know exactly the answer. I have an intuition that if all of society would be completely devoid of people like Isaiah Berlin, something really bad is going to happen. Because these great minds are able to deal with changing environments that maybe AI will not do, because they have the human element, they have human bodies, human emotions that we continuously infuse into the work. And if you take this away, you lose something very, very important of humanity. I don't want to be in a world in which we will not have the next Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, or there will be robots or machines. I think this would be a very, very sad word. But this is not something that I can do anything about as an educator. So when you think about, educating people towards a change, some people would say you take 1,000 people, and 900 of them would be useless for anything of a spirit. And then maybe 20 would be decent, and 1 would be the genius that will change the world of the spirit forever. I think we should look past that. I think we should look to a situation where all the 1,000 matters, every single one of them, and they matter because we can think about learning as a form of exercise. So just like we know that exercise is important, and if you don't walk or run or lift weights or anything for years, you will be sick and you will just have a miserable life. I think the same is true for the word of the Spirit. If you don't have this capacity to read books, to write well, something is lost. However, the capacity to run and jump and pull and throw and push are all things that were ingrained in our genetics over millions of years of evolution. And the capacity to analyze philosophy is still today, even today, the province of a few, and just a few hundred years ago, the province of a tiny, tiny segment of society. So why exactly do we need that? Would it make us into better citizens so we can walk better, we can vote better? Would it make us better friends, better family? I don't know. I intend to find out as much as I can. I want to see exactly how we can use learning, and I'm not talking now about the basic things that everybody starts in elementary school, but the thing that you learn at the BA, MA, and a PhD level at university. How can this be used as a form of exercise? Now, many of you who watch this channel know that I've been doing powerlifting and a little bit of bodybuilding for many years. And my trainer from Israel always used to say, we have a very, very mature sport. We're a mature sport because we have hundreds of years people have been bodybuilding, 50 years when we have many people bodybuilding, many people, millions of able-bodied men and women that are doing everything, and they're trying to exercise and doing exactly the same. And that's the basis for an amazing scientific understanding that is very stable. So now we know that squats are good for you and deadlifts are good for you, and you don't need to listen to all these influencers that arrive today and bring all kinds of strange ideas. You don't need that. You have the basics. What do we know about writing? We don't know. We don't know, because I could tell to my students 3 years ago, I will teach you how to write so you'll have a nice summer house when you grow up. I said it with a straight face and I believe that. I can't do it anymore, because the tool that I gave to my students was a tool that was designed to make them better at work. Okay? It was a professional skill. It's just like, if you would try to teach farmers in the Middle Ages how to be bodybuilders. No, they all day are carrying logs and stones and tilling the ground. They didn't have any attention for that. Now we can start, and it's just a beginning, because I still believe that I'm teaching valuable things to my students and they can't rely only on the machine. But when we get to the point where language is a sport, when we review Yesaya Berlin as we would view somebody that is a great powerlifter, like Eddie Hall, for example, somebody that we can emulate in order to become happier and successful not successful, but happier with ourselves, and maybe even healthier for ourselves, then we reach a new point that I think is a very interesting point. Until we reach this point, the best you can do is read him, reflect about him, and enjoy it. That's all for today from me, Shai Dotan. As always, I would be very happy if you like and subscribe and watch the other videos. And until next time, please keep learning.